Okay, so next up, there was a little bit of a scare. Like I had seen Michael tweets earlier today that he got up really early because he's in the US, and I think he's in like on Central Time. And then he wasn't ready yet, or he wasn't showing up yet in the speaker room, but he's now here. So Michael Hibay is the CTO of Vesti. Vesti is a social network for investors. I've had discussions with Michael before about complexity and about affordance catalogs. Like I think, Michael, you tweeted at some time about affordance catalogs, and I went like, "Oh, this is interesting." And I had a conversation about this with him, but this time I asked him to do a presentation about affordance catalogs and to talk a little bit more about how that could impact the developer portal and improve the accessibility of the content that you're providing. So hi, Michael. Thank you for joining.
Hello, thank you. It's great to be here. I'm thrilled to finally get the chance to be in Paris. Though I have to admit, I'm a little disappointed. It just really feels not as different as I was hoping.
Right. Yeah, it's the same here. Well, looking forward, I'm going to hand it over to you. I also wish I could be in Paris, although December is kind of bad because then there's all the strikes. So, we should go another time.
Okay. Well, we'll put it on the calendar then.
Yeah.
So. All right. Of course, I'm having technical difficulties now. Is my slides moving at all? Wonderful. They're not. There we go. Got everything fixed now here. So, hello everybody. My name is Michael Hibay. As alluded to, I'm the CTO at Vesti Social. We are an investment messaging and collaboration app to build a tool that helps normal investors like you and me to get more value out of their investments and invest in companies and causes that they're really interested in. We are an API first company. I have a long history in APIs, and we're using really bleeding edge API capabilities, hypermedia to build our platform as a real competitive advantage. And one thing I wanted to make sure was kind of clear beforehand was that all of these kind of principles and techniques that I'm going to talk about today are things that we actually use every day. This isn't kind of one of those theoretical things that could happen or stuff. This is tested. This is being built out and used right now by us. So we are not just the president, but we buy our own product here, so to speak. So, kind of want to kick it off by saying, why are we here? Well, I don't want to assume too much about all the audience here, but I think it's pretty safe to say that we've all had some bad experiences, or maybe are currently having bad experiences with documenting APIs, services, service sprawl, whether we're consumers or producers of those APIs. We've experienced those issues and trying to figure out what to do and how to use a service. And I want to focus today on making it easier, making this really hard thing that we all do a little easier on ourselves. It can be pretty easy to say, don't do this, this is bad. But that really doesn't give us a path forward or a way to help. So that's going to be the focus of what we're going to do here. So I want to kick that off here. Sorry about that. There was a slide that slipped in there that shouldn't have been there. I want to step back and show what this is here. Affordance catalogs may be a term or something that people aren't familiar with, and maybe something new for you to hear, or maybe it's something that's coming up in your repertoire somewhat recently. But I wanted to show what this looked like before we got started here to really prove that this isn't some theoretical, this isn't some long away dream that can happen. This is something that's available right now. And you can do it with the technology and the capability and the tools that you have at your disposal currently. This is what it looks like. Right now, kind of just hold on and pause. Don't worry too much about interpreting all of this or going through all of it. But I just wanted to start off by showing this is really what it is. Hopefully you'll have the energy here at the end of the day. This will give you a little boost needed to kind of follow the rest of the story through, because it may be a bit of a longer explanation, but I promise there is a payoff at the end. I want to go through and talk about what affordances are. That's a new word for a lot of people a lot of times when I kind of go through and discuss these things here. But fundamentally, if we look at this door that's kind of pictured here, what we see is, and what we know is things that we can do. And generally, I would try and get some audience participation here and get everything to yell out there. So for my benefit, I'm going to assume that everybody kind of just shouted out the word that is possible when you see this and you encounter this in front of you. When you see a door handle like this, you know that you pull it. It's something that you just know implicitly, regardless of where you see this door. You just know that you can do that to that door. So one things that is difficult about affordances is actually just understanding what you can do in this environment. And so if you have a black box of capabilities and you have no details that give you this instant understanding of it, you need to look into it, you need to dig into it, you need to understand what's going to happen or what's going to be done, and you have to spend a lot of time and effort doing it. Affordance is the implicit, almost subconscious understanding of the capabilities that you could have based on nearly no processing. Now, from a human perspective, you see that with a door handle, but from an API perspective, from a systems perspective, it's minimizing the amount of work that you need to do in order to understand capabilities that are present in the system. And when we go through these problems, we talk about things and issues that are happening when you're building APIs and services. You'll encounter a lot of issues that are going to be pervasive and consistent across a lot of capabilities, and you want to figure out what's difficult about doing this, and you want to figure out a way to ease that pain and fix that. So you want to look at things that are consistently hard across all of this experience and try and figure out how to make those better. Make those better for your developers who are providing the platform, make it better for your consumers. And there's a lot of things across my experience that have been really kind of consistently hard. I'm not going to really list them out here, but there's a couple I really want to highlight, and that's the N+1 problems and nearly identical models. When you're going through and designing these systems, you'll get to a point where you'll have requirements from users which seem similar. They're very close, and you just add another one, and these two things are coupled together. But when you accept that one incrementally and go to the next one and go to the next one, what you end up with is a mess of services and mappings that are defined that maybe aren't necessarily reusable. They're specifically for one application. And if you trace that lineage to its logical conclusion, you end up with the back end for the front end pattern, where your services are really defined for one very specific case or one very specific use case, and you're exposing that to the world. Now, that's not to poo-poo on the pattern. It's a very good pattern, and it has some really good applications, but those are specific requirements on where it will be a good application. So there's a lot of other difficulties that you kind of get to when you go through governance, when you go through design standardization, you get divergent models, and you get a lot of these issues where you just have a lot of users that are involved, and teams that become independent, and you want to be independent, are impeded in that independence, kind of going forward. And you get a lot of unintended consequences when you start venturing down these things here. So I want to kind of set up a little bit of a hypothetical here. We're gonna kind of just go real quick through. So let's say we have 4 teams and we're trying to define a random model. One team needs X minus C, one team needs X plus Y, another needs X plus C, and finally, to take the cake, the final team needs X minus Y plus C. So if we kind of think about this, we're really stuck in a pickle. One thing is just, it's not going to work. You can't satisfy everybody with those requirements leading into it. And when we're building APIs and we're designing these for systems with really divergent needs, this is what we end up with a whole lot of the time. And so there's 2 hard problems in computer science. And I warn you, the jokes here, if it wasn't already evident, are just going to be awful. But that's what I'm hoping that you're not here for, that, the humor. We have naming things. Everybody knows this joke. Everybody has kind of seen at least one incarnation of it. And we have cache eviction. We've off-by-one errors. And of course, asynchronous callbacks, just throwing in whenever they feel like it. Naming things is really hard. It's a perennial problem. And it's always discussed as a problem because the way you look at things is dependent upon what kind of context you're in or what perspective that you're looking at things from. And it's always difficult because the cases and the people that you're speaking with always vary slightly and are different. So you go through and you try and figure out what's the name here, but you can only ever do the best that you can with the information that you know currently. And kind of want to just go through what is kind of challenging about the name here for a second. Everything has a name. And in fact, what's really challenging it is that generally speaking, things have more than one name. And they're not necessarily mutually exclusive, and they're not necessarily synonymous all the time either. They're different, and they're related to the perspective of the person who's doing the naming themselves. And so there's an element of kind of context awareness in names that are relevant. And so names really aren't key in a database sense. They aren't universally unique, and they aren't something that's going to be constant. You need to maintain names. You need to adjust them over time. And if you've ever done a query in a database against these kind of fields where you think a name is something is really static, you very quickly find out that the edge cases become difficult is when the assumption that you make names are forever falls and fails. So we may have the same names for things. We may not have the same names for things. This is a conference being held in Paris. It's in nominally, I guess, the primary language is French. It's not a language that I speak. We have other languages, other words, other names for all these things that are being spoken right now on stages across the whole conference. And that's not necessarily the thing here. So our challenges with names, things kind of came out of order here. So I guess I'll just pause here for just a moment and kind of go in here. Concluding a little bit of what was kind of alluded to in the previous point, that names are really relative. And the perspective that you have is really the context that these names are relevant from. And RDF statements is coming out of the knowledge graph, the semantic web, the JSON LD or RDF world. It's a understanding of how to build knowledge from axioms and build up further, and being able to define things in a way that is consistent and definable here. So if you see in here in this definition that the object and the subject are both contexts, they're both just places. So when you're defining an edge in this knowledge graph, you're going to traverse from one node, one context to another context, and you're talking about the metadata of that relationship, that edge on a graph. And those contexts kind of are part of the definition of what we're talking about with the name. So all of these things together are kind of naming and defining these concepts. And I don't exaggerate at all when I say that if we don't get naming done correctly, it's going to end up, in my experience, from large organizations with tens of thousands of developers. If we don't get this done correctly, if we don't define names correctly, it will lead us to building the wrong organization structure. Our architecture will be unfit for the actual application that our consumers and customers need, and we'll solve problems that don't, we'll spend a ton of time solving problems that don't deliver consumer value. So I have a few short things that I say all the time about APIs, and they're specious, and they are a language. This does not imply that APIs are a specious language. It's not one of those commutative properties things. Don't put them together. It changes the meaning entirely. And this is a long lead up into what I hope will be a very direct example here. And I want to thank everybody for kind of sticking on to this near the end of the day here. This is really what we do. This is really what we do use to define, and we do use this. Our front-end engineers, our back-end engineers, and operations, which is mostly me, looks at this to be able to manage our system. So we have our names. So I'll go through and just kind of click in on all of them here. Over the course of about 3 months of development, 3 to 4 months of development proceeding here, we had developed a list of names that were associated with name itself. And I think, as you can see, some of them are kind of mutually exclusive. Some of them don't seem to be name, but they're proxies to names, and they just don't seem to make a whole lot of sense. But fundamentally, all of these were functioning as name for users or things in the system. And you may notice that the with that discrepancy, the previous example that I had kind of demonstrated really is just a thinly veiled or abstracted version of this problem that we have directly experienced here. We had these names, and we have this problem of trying to figure out how to manage it. And some of the queries were considering some of these things as key in our system, which they really weren't. So we get to this point where we want to be able to use this. We want to be able to find out and use one word, and we get to the point where it's impossible for us to create this single name or single concept of name that serves for all of these use cases. It's really just divergent, and we've learned that it's really context sensitive. So how do we fix it? How do we go from here? What do we do, and how do we proceed? Because we need to build a system that's going to be reusable. We need to not incrementally build a service for every new thing that wants to happen in the front end. That certainly is not going to enable hypermedia systems. So we need to find another way. And we go through and we find out that the request isn't observable. We don't really know what the user's trying to accomplish. And across all of these different types, the names, the tasks, how to do it, it's all inconsistent. We had a very RPC CRUD-based system, and we couldn't figure out how to actually get consistent processing or affordance associated with at that level. How do we do a name change? How do we do something that's so simple from a consumer perspective, But when we look at the details of what names are and how they change and where they're defined and what services and dependencies they come from, that we can't. And when we analyzed going through this API, we looked at the design lineage. What we saw was a real striking resemblance. So I'm going to kind of zoom in real quick on display image, which is a portion of kind of some of those names, or display names, excuse me, which was a portion of the naming subset. Solve the whole problem together. We can't figure out one name that's going to solve all of the problems, but we can find problems that are very similar and can span many contexts. And what we found is that, for example, a user profile and a chat room both have functionally the same requirement. They both want to simply change a display name, and it's a capability that users need to express very simply. So there's no reason for us to have two different ways of doing that. In fact, it makes it more difficult to do so, and spend a lot of time trying to relitigate decisions and choices that we've made in the past. Instead, we found a way to create an affordance catalog, right? An affordance that gives us that name. Now, there's more resources on our platform that have display names here, but what we identified was this affordance that will allow us to tie it to other resources. So as consumers understand and know how to use that affordance, they can go forward into the future and they can use that affordance in the next context that they understand. They don't need to relearn all of that stuff here. And so Dry is really not about code. It's about the definitions of the concept. A display name update is consistent. That concept is true. It doesn't change based on what you name it. It's just that intent is conceptually the same. And in places where that affordance is necessary, regardless of its name or regardless of the name of the resources itself, that is consistent. And so if that message can be stored in a consistent way, it can be used in that same, it can be used in a different context in the same way, and it'll save everybody a lot of time redefining, refiguring it out. And then, and this is here. So we're finally kind of going to the important bits, and that's that affordances are context insensitive. And if you store your affordances in your catalog, if you, instead of going at the service level and creating a catalog of services which are very specific to the use case that you have in mind, you can have a huge drop in the amount of developer time spent from consumers and platform managers and producers themselves. Thank you.
Thank you, Michael. I think the core message that I'm getting is you need to watch out, because people are building a model of your service in their heads, and you need to make sure that you don't force them to change their model all the time, and that you are going along with whatever people are building up in their heads, and that you accelerate and facilitate the building of that model so that it's going to be easier to use your APIs. And ideally, they're also structured in a way that those are affordances rather than just services that do a specific job. That's what it means, right?
Yeah, that's a really great summary of it. In fact, if you can get ahead of the users who are doing it, one of the big benefits of the Affordance Catalog is the ability to get ahead of the users and help them shape that model and that understanding of that system. And then with the exposure of affordances, you can change the way that they're perceiving your platform, the way they're discovering the platform. Instead of trying to figure out what they're trying to do exactly from the business perspective, they're looking at the system and saying, what capabilities do you have now available to me? And then looking for the opportunity for it. So in a process that was very transactional with that, then you may have a lot more discovery with that process, and through the discovery, a lot more influence in the shaping of that model of what your services are.
Perfect. Thank you very much for your talk, Michael. Thank you for jumping in and doing this. It's yeah. Well, we need to continue this conversation, I think, and I'd love to hear like what the outcomes are, and what the results you're getting with this different way of building the catalog. Maybe one of the next opportunities. Maybe we'll see each other next time in Paris.
I look forward to it.
Thank you.
Thank you.